Gary and Mary Ruth, we've been working on this story for a long time, and we'll tell you right up front that it's going to be hard to swallow at first. This week we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government. While that may be hard to believe coming from the UFO perspective, we've certainly learned in Watergate and the Iran-Contra scandal that factions within our government can and do pursue their own hidden agendas outside of the law, outside the control of Congress, or the knowledge of the American people. This is exactly the type of operation we'll hear about tonight. It's a chilling scenario with worldwide implications that may have its roots right here. Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. These photos, never before shown in public, are about as close as anyone will ever come to seeing what the place looks like again. The dry bed of Groom Lake, corrugated metal buildings, a 3-mile-long runway, and some highly sophisticated radar and detection equipment. It's been known by many names over the years: Dreamland, the Ranch, the Skunk Works. If ever there was a place to test a secret new technology, this is it, and that's exactly what's been done here for decades. Area 51 is where Francis Gary Powers and the other U-2 pilots were trained in the 50s, and where the U-2 itself was developed. The SR-71 spy planes that spotted Soviet missiles in Cuba in the early 60s were also developed at 51. 51 is where stealth technology was nurtured, where Star Wars devices are still tested, and where all manner of CIA monkey business has been plotted and refined. It's the perfect place for secret things, but of course that's no secret. 51 is ringed by the forbidden vastness of the Nevada test site, by the looming Groom Mountains, and by sparsely populated desert expanses. The few people who do live out here have no love lost for the military, but they're conservative, patriotic, and they mind their own business. You ever see stuff you can't explain?
Sure. Lots of stuff.
Care to elaborate?
No.
Happy anniversary!
On any given night at the Rachel Bar and Grill, you might find 3 or 4 people who work at Area 51, there amid the flowing Budweisers and cowboy hats. You might find them, but they aren't going to talk to you, not about the things they've seen over the mountains. A steady trickle of curiosity seekers flows through here, strangers drawn by strange stories of lights in the night sky. Their questions also go unanswered. No one who's worked at Dreamland has ever publicly acknowledged what so many people have suspected for years, that alien technology is being tested in the Nevada desert. The speculation first surfaced in documents obtained by UFO researchers, documents about something called Project Aquarius. The documents, allegedly prepared for an organization called MJ-12, state that a program to fly recovered alien spacecraft was established in 1972 and is continuing in Nevada. The next
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Hope you guys are doing great. Thursday, weekend's almost upon us, so I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday tomorrow. Let's get this weekend started off right. Anyways, I wanted to focus now on somebody that I mentioned quite a bit on my last story that I had came out with. This name might sound familiar with you because he's been synonymous with the whole UFO, ufology movement. Not necessarily wanting to be, which is kind of the awkward thing about this man. He never wanted to be in the spotlight about this. He never accepted payments to talk about this. And in fact, he's very reluctant to talk about it with anybody. What he originally did was self-preservation, which was very, very smart. And I'm talking about Bob Lazar. Now, what he did, like I said, was very clever. And if you read a lot of the Wikipedia pages about him or other sources, he gets a lot of discredit. Excuse me. But some of the stuff that he presents is irrefutable evidence that how the hell would somebody know about this or know about that unless they were privy to that type of information. That's what I'm going to go over. I'm going to try to keep this video either part 1 and part 2 or part just 1 total. I know usually if it goes over 30 minutes, you're going to lose, viewer interest, and I don't want to do that. So let me hop right into this. Bob Lazar, he graduated MIT with a degree in physics. Now, excuse me, guys. I am so sorry. I don't know. All of a sudden, I start talking to get a rabbit in my throat. All right. Sorry about that. The funny thing is, when they go back and they try to look at some of his records, they can't find his records. But the other odd thing is that his name shows up in other places to kind of counter what, universities like MIT or Los Alamos laboratories have said. For instance, he became a contractor working for Los Alamos Labs, and he had made the front page because he had transitioned his Honda car and put a jet engine in it. Now, on the Wikipedia page, it says that he graduated the 3rd lowest in his science class, and he was only taking chemistry. Now, I don't know about you, but I took analytical chemistry, which is a lot different in a sense that you're doing more measurements, more or less data, analytics, basically like percentages, a fancy way of saying like statistics. Of course, I know about some components when it comes to the periodical table, but that wasn't the core teachings of analytical chemistry. Bob Lazar, he took chemistry in high school. All of a sudden, they discredit him by saying he never went past, this in high school. So when they look at him going to MIT or to some junior college, you're telling me that a man who graduated 3rd lowest in his class was able to put a jet engine in his car by himself? I mean, I'm no rocket scientist by any means, but how the hell do you do that? Because not only are you having to reinforce the frame because that jet engine is going to rip that car into shreds if it, exceeds a certain amount miles per hour, which I'm sure, he put on some type of limiter to make sure that it wasn't going to bend the frame of the car, that it wasn't going to, just rip the tires off. All of the above. I mean, all of that has to come into play, and he was smart enough to know that. And in the paper, it regards him as a Los Alamos physicist. He was a contractor there. Los Alamos Labs is famous for a lot of things, but mostly for their test on nuclear power, energy, and also nuclear weapons. It's kind of compartmentalized where you have one faction studying, the effects of nuclear power, and then the other faction studying, nuclear weapons and how else they could be used. The two never interact or change notes, which is also a problem in science, because if you're unable to trade notes with somebody regarding something so serious, then where are you going to get? You're not going to get anywhere. And that was one thing that always bothered him. When he came out in the paper for his jet engine car, it listed him as, a contract physicist at Los Alamos Labs. And when the news story broke about this guy who went to the media for fear of his life, there was no record of him ever being there. But of course, they can't erase the paper that he was in. So already there's one strange thing. there was a few ufologists that really discounted him, that really thought, like, you know, he was just full of shit. Stanton Friedman was one of them, and I forgot the other one. Stanton Friedman was always kind of on the line about things. Like, he had his core hardcore beliefs, and those are his opinions. I respect that, but you know, he just immediately dismissed anything about Bob Lazar. But the thing that made him so intriguing to people and to this day is, one, he made Area 51 synonymous with the public. I mean, before that, you know, some of the local residents that live around, you know, the area in Nevada, you know, had seen weird things. I mean, of course, as you may have seen in the opening, that's where they developed the U-2 spy plane. That's where they developed the, what is it, the Black Hawk? That jet is insane. And it leaks fuel like a mother. Like, I don't know why they couldn't get that fixed, but I mean, the moment they're filling it up, it's just spilling fuel everywhere. They were afraid that it would catch on fire, but you could tell it was the first stealthy airplane by the way they laid out, you know, the stealth technology to make the smallest cross section. And the thing could, you know, fly higher than any airplane. I still think to this date. And also, I think a lot of misidentifications took place there when people were spotting triangles, you know, in the sky. That looks exactly like the stealth fighters, the stealth bombers. And I think, you know, some of it was misidentification. But the story of Bob Lazar goes a lot deeper than just what I've mentioned so far. So, this is how it started for him. There was a symposium given by one of the fathers of the atomic bomb, Edward Teller, who was at Los Alamos Labs, given, you know, a speech. And Bob Lazar had noticed that he had the paper and was, you know, reading through it and everything. And he went up to him and introduced himself to Edward Teller and said, yeah, you know, that's me on the cover, this and that. And they struck up a conversation. He said it was nothing big, you know, it was just, you know, wanting to introduce myself and, you know, tell him how much I was, you know, I respected him, and, you know, how, you know, I would love to continue to, you know, do this for the rest of my life, this and that. And they went their separate ways. Some years later, and it's no lie because even Bob Lazar admitted it, him and his wife had to open up brothels in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now that's going to come into play later on because everything was fine with, you know, their brothels. Nothing was completely wrong with them whatsoever. A couple years later, after the whole New Mexico thing, they moved to Las Vegas, to Nevada. And at this time, you know, he had left Los Alamos. He had started his, you know, his business with him and his wife. And he said, you know, he just had an itching to get back into the scientific community. So he sent out a reference letter and kind of reminded Edward Teller, yeah, you know, we had a conversation at Los Alamos Labs. I was a crazy guy who made the jet car, this and that. And when you hear him speak, you can tell he is very bright, very educated. So for people to be disparaging him and putting him down and saying, oh no, you know, he's fake, it's kind of hard for me to, you know, latch on to that, because I always try to stay 50-50. You know, like, okay, this guy's either full of shit or, you know, he's telling the truth. For me, he's always, like, for all these years, since 1985, I believe, his story has never changed. One thing they say about a liar is when you start to add up a lie, then you layer that with another lie and another lie and another lie. Eventually, you're going to lose track and you're going to get caught. In all the years, 85, 95, 2000, 2015, so almost for 40 years, he has been telling the absolute truth. He's been on the Joe Rogan show. He's been on Coast to Coast AM. I mean, all these big shows, and it takes an arm and a leg to get him on. One, he doesn't care to talk about, the subject. He doesn't really believe in aliens, anything of that nature. But what had happened was Edward Teller remembered him, and he said, given your work, at Los Alamos, because he had explained to him that what he was working on, he's like, we're looking for people who could think outside the box to back engineer some technology that we have. And of course, Bob Lazar had no idea what he was talking about, but he was like, yeah, anything to get, back into, the sector of, the scientific community. So he went down, was interviewed, was given all the clearance. Highest civilian clearance you could get is Q clearance. That's exactly what he got. So he gets Q clearance, and he automatically agrees to all the stipulations. One, they would have to tap the phones at his house. So all his conversations would be monitored, which he agreed to. His whereabouts might be monitored, even though he wouldn't know when or where, but his whereabouts would be monitored. His activities at work and how he discussed things would be monitored, because they wanted to keep everything compartmentalized. And this is by his words. He didn't work at Area 51. He worked at a subset of Area 51 that is called Papoose Lake, which is within the Area 51 compound that is completely closed off. Excuse me. You know what happens when you eat popcorn? Anyways. But it's fenced off. And where he worked was about 15 miles, I believe it was southeast or northeast of the big 3-mile landing strip of Area 51. That was kind of built into the side of the mountains to where it would land, it would land cover from any, spy satellites that were going around at that time. He said when he first got there, that he walks in and all these hangar doors are open, about 9 of them, and he happens to look over and he sees what he describes is your classic UFO. And he had a nickname for all of them. The one that he was assigned to work on, he would call the sports model, because it looked like the typical, flying saucer that we see, and that's been made famous by countless amounts of people. And he saw that there was an American flag or American sticker on it, and he goes, this is where this has been coming from. And he touched it and immediately got reprimanded. And so he's like, okay, shit, this is odd. So then he goes through the whole process of getting biometric access. And mind you, this was in the early 80s. Handprint technology to open doors was in its infancy, and he described it perfectly. Exactly what it looked like, who the makers were, how it could be hit or miss and shoddy. But he described exactly how this thing looked, and it looked nothing like you would expect it to look these days. In fact, when I used to work at the VA, we were in control of a lot of Schedule II substances. And for those of you guys who aren't really familiar, those are things like Vicodin, Percocet, Dilaudid, fentanyl, things of that nature, morphine. So we would have to go and deliver stuff like that to them. And when my employees had to go up there, they had to knock on the door or ring the doorbell, because they didn't have biometric access, because there was a scanning pad that, each pharmacy employee had to lay their hands on. how to do a retinal scan and then badge. So it was pretty big. And this big outdated biometric hand scanner, you know, it was just gaudy, and he just was like, wow, you know, this is the first time he's seen this. He's already impressed with all this technology. He said the first day there was just filling out nothing but paperwork, you know, the paperwork about the confidentiality, about making sure that, you know, his work was strictly only shared between him and his coworker, which he called, what was his name? Barry. I'm sorry, guys. Thought I had floss. But his coworker Barry, and only between the two of them were they able to communicate what exactly they were working on. Other than that, they could not get others involved or speak about their projects to other people, to the other scientists that were there, that were working on all these other, you know, spacecrafts. Now, when he started finding out that, okay, this is not made by any known, you know, country, and it's not made by the US, he started describing when he got the opportunity to, as it being almost made, back then he said, like, you know, if it was almost made out of a mold, but you could kind of liken it to now almost being made by like a 3D printer. He said the way it worked was, and this is far before they even ever discovered this, but it worked off of element 115. Now, element 115 was just recently discovered about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was so, how's the word I'm looking for here? Its energy span was so short that it only lasted for a few milliseconds, and then dissipated. But they were able to still chart it down on the periodic table as element 115. Well, Bob Lazar had already said they had amounts of element 115, which they called, and I forgot the name that they called it, so I apologize there. But what this element did was it helped them as a form of fuel with 3 directional, I guess you would call them almost engines of sorts, that once this fuel, this element 115, was placed inside of this craft, and he said it was very small, that it was meant for people who were very tiny, you know, and again, he's not thinking aliens. He's thinking, you know, this has to be for smaller people or something, I don't know. But he's not automatically going to the alien theory. He said what this would do is it would bend the light around this craft, which would make it virtually impossible to see. Not only did it do that, but if you were to go and touch it, it would almost be like, you know, the opposite of a magnetic effect. You know how when you put the opposite ends of a magnet together and they repel one another? He said that's the same feeling you got when you went to go touch this. And it was because of this element 115. Now, this completely intrigued him because this was not even charted on the periodical table at that time. Now, with this element, he said the scientists at Papoose Lake, or what they essentially called it S4, they were able to synthesize large amounts of this element 115. And again, you have people like Stanton Friedman and other ufologists who are just saying, oh, you know, he's full of shit, you know, he's lying. There's no such thing. But in fact, excuse me, God, I don't know what's wrong with me today. he would go on to prove them extremely wrong. So let's get back into some of the things that he had to say and some of the things that he was able to prove, not only to, the naysayers, but to the world, to put Area 51 on the map, literally. And mind you, the government barely recognized Area 51 as being a military base, with it being clear as day that it existed. They never once acknowledged its existence. So, don't you think that's a little weird? I sure did. And so, let's listen to some more about Bob Lazar.
National Security Agency has confirmed it does have a Project Aquarius, but denies it has anything to do with flying saucers. NSA will not say what Project Aquarius is. Speculation was heightened in 1984 when the Air Force seized nearly 90,000 acres around Groom Lake. The action was, by most accounts, illegal. During congressional hearings about the land grab, Congressman John Seiberling grilled the military about the legal authority used in the action and was told the authority was at a much higher level than the Air Force. Seiberling asked what authority is higher than the laws of the United States. The Air Force official said he could respond, but only in a closed briefing. In 1987, when the Air Force sought to renew its stranglehold on the Groom Range, news articles once again mentioned the talk about alien spacecraft, and subsequent articles in national magazines quoted unnamed sources about things of alien origin flying in Nevada.
So, back then, what they're talking about essentially right now is people were able to hike to a certain part of one of the mountains that kind of overlooked the base, and with a good camera, with a high focus lens, I mean, they could get really good pictures and things of that nature. And when the Air Force caught wind of this, that's when they began the land grab, and something that was totally, like they mentioned, was illegal. They definitely did, and it was really, it was uncalled for.
Things that would make filmmaker George Lucas drool. Despite the speculation, no one who knew Area 51 from the inside ever talked publicly about the saucer stories.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention. Portions were broadcast by radio in 6 European countries and in a nationally televised TV special in Japan.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs.
Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now.
So there's 2 times that schools that he went to, MIT and then Los Alamos, and then being discredited as him finishing low, third lowest in his class in just chemistry. I mean, chemistry and physics, they don't really go hand in hand. But the guy, like I said, is clearly intelligent. And for them to say, no, we have no record of him here, it's preposterous.
We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
Well, they're trying to make me a non-person.
Explain. You called where?
Well, the schools that I went to, the hospital that I was born at, past job, and essentially nothing comes up with my name in it.
He smiles, but out of futility, knowing the whole thing must sound ridiculous. According to Lazar, his employer was the United States Navy. He says he and other government employees would gather near EG&G, fly to Groom Lake, then a very few people would get into a bus with blacked out or no windows and drive to S4. When you get off the bus, what do you see?
It's a very interesting building. It's got a slope of probably about 30 degrees, which are hangar doors. and it has textured paint on it, but it looks like sand. It's made to look like the side of the mountain that it's in, whether it's to disguise it from satellite photographs or what.
He says he was never told exactly what he'd be working on, but figured it had something to do with advanced propulsion. On his first day, he was told to read a series of briefings and immediately realized how advanced the propulsion was.
The power source is an antimatter reactor. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually 2 parts to the drive mechanism.
You know, so during this whole time, everything that he's saying, of course, is going to be scrutinized. Everything is going to be, and as you should be skeptic of anybody who tells, you know, a story like, hey, I've seen a Bigfoot. For instance, I used to be part of this Bigfoot society on Facebook, and it was clearly a photoshopped thumbnail. Clearly a photoshopped thumbnail. And all these people who are supposedly so, you know, Bigfoot believers, this and that, just start ripping me a new one. And I'm like, did you guys even watch the freaking video that's attached to it? Like, I had been part of this group for like 10 years or something like that. I don't know, like, you know, like since it first came out, and I'm the one who gets kicked out of the group. So I'm like, these motherfuckers, like, you know, shit, I'm more closely related to Bigfoot than you guys are. I mean, shit, he's tall and brown, and so am I, goddammit. Although I'm not hairy. Look at that. Not hairy at all. People ask me, do you shave your arms or do you nair? Like, I am not hairy at all. Hey, it's a good thing. I mean, I have hair where it counts, but I mean, my arms, my legs, I mean, seriously looks like I shave, but I don't. Anyways, you know, being a part of this group, of course I'm going to be skepticism, you know, have that skepticism, but this one guy's like, oh, you're the type that, you know, needs a body to, you know, validate that it's real. Well, yeah, I definitely do. For years, they thought that the giant squid was just people's, you know, fancy imagination. It wasn't until they actually found one that washed up on shore that measured over 100 feet long that they were like, oh shit, you know, okay, people weren't, you know, over exaggerating. And then with the advent of, you know, more technology, more, you know, being able to study, you know, the ocean better with, you know, video cameras that they capture all these different types of beasts underwater. I mean, yeah, you had to be skeptical. And so, you know, going into a lot of what he went through and what I'm going to go ahead and show you guys, it would be hard to find that he's actually lying. And I'll explain why here in a minute. So, he was constantly under the threat of being told that his life it could be easily snuffed out. That was one of the main causes, of course. If somebody's telling you that, hey, you know, just as easily as we brought you on, we could also take you out. So he agreed to do lie detector tests. He agreed to just about everything that would prove that he is telling the truth. And here is a little excerpt from one of the many lie detector tests that he had taken, polygraph tests.
That fear factor would surface later. Lazar agreed to undergo a polygraph exam as part of this report. Polygrapher Ron Slay asked about the technology Lazar had seen.
Did you knowingly lie when you said you had actually seen anti-gravity propulsion in operation?
No.
The results of this exam were inconclusive. Lazar appeared to be truthful on one test, deceitful on a second. Slay recommended that a second examiner be brought in. Polygrapher Terry Tavernetti runs a corporate security operation and is a former Los Angeles police officer. He put Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive.
And I left there thinking that
I feel we do have some credibility to what the subject had to say. And that's when I went to some of my colleagues.
Tavernetti sent the test results to a third polygrapher who agreed the results appeared truthful. The charts were then sent to a fourth examiner who did not agree, suggesting Lazar might be relating information he'd learned from someone else. The polygraphers conferred and decided they would not issue a final statement on truthfulness until more specific testing can be conducted.
Right there is absolutely true. He never sought out money. He never sought out fame. He didn't want to be a part of the UFO lectures. In fact, I think he maybe did one or two, if that. He hates talking about the subject. I mean, it took a lot for the director of his documentary, that Jeremy Corbell, it took a lot for him to convince Bob Lazar to go on the Joe Rogan show. And when they had dinner the night before, you know, he's telling Joe Rogan about, you know, his story, because like I said, this has been 30-40 years now that this information has been out, and it's never changed. It's always been the same, and it is just mind-blowing that when somebody is telling the truth, your story is not going to change. But when somebody's blatantly lying, you know, layer on top of layer on top of layer, somebody's going to end up slipping up, and then their whole story goes to shit. He does not do that. He never has done that. And in fact, let's pull up a clip of Joe Rogan talking about his interview with Bob Lazar to one of his guests. This gentleman right here is a man who it'll start playing again, but he is a director of the documentary. Bob Bigelow was the gentleman that I was speaking of with Skinwalker Ranch. He was the one who purchased it, and he tells his story about meeting Bob Lazar for the first time. Again, not a single one of them discredit him or feel that anything he said was full of shit or was a lie. Again, just extremely interesting. Let's see if I could find... Here it is. So I'm gonna rewind it back just a little bit here. So this is Joe Rogan talking to his one of his guests after his interview with Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell, and you can see it right here. Episode 1315, and it's 2 hours 15 minutes long. Like I said, this is where a lot of the body language readers has said there's nothing there that would indicate that he is being deceitful. So I'll let this play for about 7-8 minutes or so. It kind of gives you a good idea of where he's coming from with this and how much nothing has changed over the years.
Store at like 2, and then I watched some goofy. I've been on this UFO documentary kick.
Watching UFO documentaries?
Yeah, I told you it was David. I started talking about it.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
Yeah.
What were you? Did you have something specific that you saw recently?
Yeah,
the documentary.
2 of them. One of them is Area 51, Bob Lazar, and Area 51 and flying saucers. It's a documentary on this guy who claimed that he worked on these alien ships in Area 51 in the 1980s.
That gave me chills.
As time's gone on, more of the things that he said have proven to actually be true.
Like what?
Including an element that he talked about, element 115, I think it was called.
Like an organism from outer space?
No, an element, like a man-created element. You know, like there's carbon.
Right.
There's an element that they created that he talked about way before it was ever publicized. And he talked about this thing, and then it turned out to be true. He talked about these, there's these hand monitors that you would put your hand on this thing, and these lines, these metal lines would detect the distances in the bones of your fingers the exact distances, and everyone is different. It's like a signature thing. And that they could find out if it was you or not you that was trying to go through. So the way they would scan people, the bioscan, would literally measure the bones in their fingers. And people said that was horseshit.
wild.
He talked about this in the 1980s. People said it was horseshit, but then later on it turned out, no, they did have that in Los Alamos, they did have that in Area 51, and that this technology was very, very
Advanced?
not just very advanced, but it was not well known at all. Like, very few people did. And this guy who was creator of this documentary, it was very difficult for them to get photos of this hand scanner. But this hand scanner did exist, and existed exactly as this guy described it.
In the 80s, I mean, that's super progressive for that time.
There's also
even
people
for now.
that did approve his top secret clearance to get to this place. They know that he actually worked there. There's people that worked in the same Los Alamos lab with him. They tried to say he never worked there, but his name's on the manifest. It's very strange. It's like they've tried to erase parts of this guy's past because he filmed a bunch of their crafts as they were flying around. Like, he knew what days. This is the thing. That thing right there, you put your hand on that, and it actually measures the distance of the size and length of your bones.
That looks like something that's inside of an escape room in LA.
It does. It's hilarious. It's so true. But
Doesn't it?
I went into this documentary skeptical.
As you should.
Yeah, but I'm so done with all those things. But listen to this guy talk for a while. After a while, I was like, what if he's telling the truth? Like, what if he is actually telling the truth? Because if he's actually telling the truth, there is some part of the government that had access, at least in the 1980s, to alien technology.
I mean,
There
it
was
probably
spaceships.
is. There probably is some truth to that. Crazier things have happened. And also, like, just your mentality of believing him is probably the same thing that made Dr. Malachi Lovejoy Robinson III become successful.
A con artist?
Yeah. I mean, either this dude, there's validity of what he's saying in this documentary, which I can't wait to watch, or he's just really great at painting a picture. Some people are so good at convincing you
That's true.
of truths.
True.
There's, people with like borderline personality disorder and every sort of spectrum in between there. They become really good manipulators.
That is true. However, usually they do that in more than one avenue.
Absolutely.
And this guy's not doing that.
Yeah, so if
He's
it's just
really-
a documentary, then...
Yeah, also hasn't varied his story. Like, I mean, he might have, like, changed the way he says things in terms of, like, the words he chooses, but the actual story is exactly the same as he was telling a long time ago.
Is this a self-produced documentary, or is
No.
there a production company involved?
No, production company
See, that's where
involved.
it's like, okay, there's probably some validity to this.
But this guy's been around for a long time. I remember reading about him and watching videos about him, 20 years ago.
So right there is something that you would, if you're interested to know more about him, there is a lot of information. So you just cannot take one thing at face value and be like, okay, I made up my mind. This guy's, full of shit. This isn't real. You gotta really give it a chance to hear it out, and just because there's so much to it. But here's the last part of where he takes his friends out. Now, the recorded tape of when they got busted by the military police, and when he decided to go to the media, that part isn't shown. But he has people like John Lear. Again, his father created the Lear jet. I mean, these aren't just some, run-of-the-mill guys. I mean, these are guys, that are billionaires, that are millionaires, and he knows when they're coming out, on Wednesday evenings, are the slowest by, the traffic, that passes by Area 51. There's not a lot of traffic back then. Of course, they bought up all that land and pushed back that traffic much, much further. I mean, you have to have a very good telescope to even catch a glimpse of Area 51 these days, besides satellite. And again, look at how long it took them to acknowledge the presence of Area 51. It took them years, and people knew it's right effing here. Why are you guys saying that it's not? But that's the government for you. So this is intentionally muted. I'm sure there was a copyright thing, but this is him before he revealed his face.
The interview had been set up at the last minute. Dennis, whose real name is Bob Lazar, met our news unit in front of the home of John Lear, put on a microphone, then sent shockwaves through UFO circles. Lazar recalls what was going through his mind at the time.
It was a very frightening moment. It was certainly not a comfortable thing to do.
Within days, the story of the Dennis interview had traveled around the world. Busloads of the saucer curious descended on the outskirts of Area 51. The little town of Rachel became a hub of ET enthusiasm, and the search was on for the true identity of the man in the shadows.
United Nuclear. Now,
when Lazar had told us he was concerned about getting into more trouble than he was already in, he was referring to this. 2 months before the Dennis interview, Lazar began taking a few friends out to the desert on Wednesday nights. They focused their attention not on Groom Lake, but in the direction of Papoose Lake, which is where Lazar said he worked, a facility he called S4. And sure enough, on each of 3 outings, the groups witnessed a glowing disc rise above Papoose, even though officially there has never been a base or facility there. How did he know? 3 decades later, the public is still fascinated with the story Lazar unleashed.
I was, very worried at the time about repercussions, and of course had no idea that we would be talking about this 30 years down the road.
well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. There's a lot to it, so you can't necessarily base your conclusion off of one video like this. I mean, this man has told 30 years of this story, and it has never changed. Like Joe Rogan explained, maybe the different words that he might use, but it's never ever once changed. And with liars, they usually stack shit upon shit until it falls over or until they get busted. And not once. He's not a guy that wants to look for profit off of this. He's not a guy that wants to, go to these UFO symposiums and answer all these questions about things. I mean, he says he doesn't even know if he saw, seen an alien, that he just saw like something that was, 4 foot. It looked like more of like a prop, but he didn't stop and really, glance in there and take a long enough look to make that determination. So he's never made extremely outlandish claims. What he has, I'm not even going to spoil it. Watch a Joe Rogan episode and you'll find out how he believes and what they were told, how we came about getting these ships. Very, very interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this. More importantly, I hope you guys have a safe and wonderful Friday. A lot of craziness going out there, a lot of crazy people. So take care of yourself, take care of others. Always call your loved ones, man. Always tell them you love them. Call your mom, call your dad. Just remind them, hey, I love you. That's all it takes. And until next time, guys, I'm out.